All right. So we're ready to go.
What happened to Lisa?
I don't know. She's gone. She maybe will come back. Hopefully.
We scared her.
She wants the recording. Welcome. Sorry about last week for those that like showed up and I wasn't here. And thanks for your grace and everything. It's good to be back. And I have a slideshow tonight, so I worked really hard on it. I hope you love it. I'm going to send it to you in an email when we're done. That way you don't have to really like focus on taking notes as much as just like absorbing stuff and being able to ask questions and all that. So I thought it probably would work better than like trying to like, what did you say? And what was this? And how do you spell that kind of deal? So anyway, we're going to start off with prayer tonight. And if someone would like to pray, and then we'll just jump right in. Who would like to be the prayer? Yeah, Kristen's like, well, if nobody else will, I will. Do it.
Okay. God, we just thank you for this time. Thank you for this group of people that can come together, and we just thank you for your word, for this truth that we can dig in and just learn more about who you are and how we can be more like you. And we just thank you for this technology that we're able to still gather together, even if we are far apart. God, we ask you to just continue to help us to come to your word with open hands and with open hearts and with open minds and open ears to hear what you have for us. And we just thank you again for who you are, for loving us no matter what, and for meeting us wherever we are. We love you so much, and we just give you this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. Thanks, Kristen. So this is probably like a more of like, it's a lot of information. We're going to go over the historical context, historical background of this letter, talk a lot about Ephesus and the people in the church in that area. But before we get started with that, and I know like almost everybody here, but maybe Lisa was like in the Philippians, like went all the way through Philippians. So everybody that's here has done their done the color coding before. But what did you think? Like, if you have done some color coding, like do you have any thoughts you want to share about anything that stuck out to you while you did your color code? Any sort of main ideas? Maybe like, did you find like maybe a verse that might have stood out as like the key verse or like the theme verse if you had to pick one? Anything?
I thought it was like, I thought this was harder a little bit. I don't know if anybody else was with me, but this was harder than it was with Philippians. For some, I don't know if it was just like, there's a lot, like, I felt like in Philippians, there was a lot of repetition that kind of like really jumped out right away to me. And so this was like, I felt like, I don't know, I was kind of struggling at first to really, to pick up some themes and stuff like that. I don't know if I'm alone in that, but I'm just being honest. Like I was kind of like, okay, to me, it felt like it kind of jumped. And I know that there's a reason, obviously, for that.
I made it.
Yay, welcome.
Thanks, sorry.
Should we introduce ourselves so she knows like who we are?
Yeah.
Well, I already watched the last week, so I feel like I know some of you.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I'm Kristen. It's nice to meet you. I'm Shelby's sister and Renee's daughter and all that jazz. So good to have you.
Hi, Dad. Yeah, I'm Melinda. I don't think I've met you before. Shelby's sister.
Hi, my name's Brad, and I'll be your waiter.
They can hear you. They can hear you.
Oh. I'm glad I didn't say something like dipshit.
Brad, it's recorded.
Oh my God.
Oh, Lord. It's
Welcome
fine.
to the family, Lisa. Welcome to the family.
Come as you are. We love you.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah.
Hello.
I excuse me, I'm Amy and I'm Renee's sister. So I'm Melinda and Kristen and Shelby's aunt, Lisa's sister also. And
Oh, cool.
That would
Cleo,
be me.
it actually says Brock Carey. That's my future.
So now Amy introduced everybody.
Oh, well, I mean,
I got it.
that's how I'm related. You all can still introduce.
Thank you for having me.
Wait till she. Brad wants to say something.
Do it.
I'm not with these people. I got a pigging competition over at the livestock pavilion. I'm gonna win that blue ribbon.
Nice.
I'm sorry.
Oh
Oh,
my
Lord.
gosh, these people. So funny.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Oh, I'm staying
Well,
now.
if Lisa doesn't come back next week, we all know why.
I'll mute.
So, Millie just texted and they're not going to come tonight. She says Kyla's running errands and Ruby is teething.
Oh,
So
no.
she's rocking her.
Oh,
She says,
Oh.
tell everybody hi and I'm sorry.
it's fine. Understandable. Anybody else want to introduce to Lisa?
Oh, hi Lisa, I'm Lisa.
Hi.
I'm Shelby.
Really.
You know me.
I sure do. She's the one that got me into all this.
Welcome to the group.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna mute now.
Okay, are we good? Cleo?
I'm Cleo. Amy already kind of said it. Soon to be daughter-in-law. So these lovely people will be my aunts and cousins, and I'm super excited.
Yeah. All right, so Lisa, did you do any of the color coding? Shelby mentioned to me that you kind of had done a little bit of like a class on inductive Bible study through church, and so maybe you had like kind of like an understanding a little bit, at least of what we were talking about when we were talking about color coding.
Yeah, I gave it a try. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
I quit that class. So
So
that-
did I.
yeah, so that kind of gives you an idea, but
Well, I hope
No,
this is better for you then.
yeah, I got through the chapter and I gave it a go.
Okay, good. Good deal. So we were just talking about like some things that stuck out to us as we were doing our color code, whether it be main ideas or just or repeated words or something that you were like, or anything that while you were reading through and kind of slowing down to notice things, you were like, oh, I didn't know this was in here, or like this seems more of a bigger deal or something than I thought for this type of study, or anything that stuck out to you, or that you have you have something.
I think, like Kristen said, it was a bit harder. I think it's just because Paul got really wordy. Like he would spend a full like paragraph to say just like one little thing. And so in the first like couple chapters, I noticed that he's using a lot of words to just say like, you were this, now you know Jesus, and you are this now. And say like, you used to be a children of wrath and now you're children of God. And like this back and forth comparing of like who you used to be before you knew Jesus and how great everything is now that you will know Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I would say that I'm with you, Cleo, on that. As I was going through, saw a lot of contrast like that, like just a lot of like, dead, you were dead and now you're alive, and darkness versus light, and old self and new self, and like just a lot of that, like sort of those contrasts or comparisons, if you will. But the one that stuck out to me, there were like kind of two different ones, but they kind of say to me similar things, like in chapter 2 verse 4, or like verse 3 to 4, or that first part where he's talking about, you know, this is what you lived before. And then in verse 4 he says, but God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. And that stuck out to me as kind of like this is what Jesus did for you. Like kind of like a theme to me of like, this is what you were, but God's mercy, you
Right.
know.
That's good. Anybody else want to share anything before we move on to like today's stuff? No? All right, we're moving on. Anybody have any questions about anything, or you're like, this made no sense to me, I didn't do any of it, I did like paragraph and I was like, I don't know, I'm not doing it anymore. Everybody good? Okay, good deal. All right, so I'm going to attempt this slideshow and share my screen, and I don't know, this is the first for me, so we're going to see what it does. Here we go. Let's see. Okay, so I think I got to pull this up first. Then, sorry, it's just a little bit. And it works fine. Okay, there we go. Oops. Sorry. Just one more thing. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Okay. Ooh, that's neat. Okay, this is what I'm sharing, so I hope it works fine. Can you see it? Okay. Great. I can't see all of you. They're only letting me see 4 of you at a time. But hi. Okay, so I'll send this to you when we're done. And I'm just going to go through, we're going to talk a lot about the historical background of Ephesus in the 1st century so that we can understand this letter. And so if you didn't like history, I'm not sure if you'll like today, but hopefully it will help you better understand why Paul is saying the things that he is saying to these people in this letter. And hopefully that will make it an even more powerful, like, understanding for you. Like, once we interpret it through, okay, so for those of you that weren't here during our when we kind of did the intro into Philippians, it's the reason that we do it this way is we want to look at the scripture and interpret it through the eyes of the original reader before we jump into our own interpretation, because that's where interpretations can be skewed a little bit. When we jump into it with our 20th century or 21st century goggles on, and we don't think of, okay, what did this mean to the people that originally read it, and what were their lives like then? Because it does, cultural context makes a big difference when you're reading this, because I would think that Paul probably didn't know that we'd be reading this letter, 2,000 years later. So there was a purpose for him to write this to the people in Ephesians, in the church. So we're going to jump right in here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is who, where, and when. And we're going to talk about who wrote it, who it was written to, and where and when it was written from. Because those things, as we talk about those, and a lot of things we're going to find within the letter that we've already began to study and read. And it's going to help our understanding of, okay, what's the time and what's going on in Paul's life that he's writing things. And like I said, what's going on in the church in Ephesus. So first, we're going to start off with who? Paul. Paul wrote it. In 1 verse 1, Paul says, he says, Paul, which is how a 1st century epistle would have been written that way. He claims himself as the author. And then there is a little bit of disagreement among scholars that that I found about Paul's authorship, because vocabulary and the theology is a bit different. Well, they just say based on that, like he uses different vocabulary than he does in his other letters, and they think that he borrowed theology from Colossians. Someone borrowed theology from Colossians and then just used Paul's name as the author to give it more credibility, because of his authority in the church, which it doesn't really, to me and to many other scholars, they think, not that I'm one, but I'm just saying, to other scholars who've written books on this, they say that Colossians and his other letters are actually like, they actually give more of a proof that Paul is the author, because there are so many similarities to Colossians and Ephesians and Romans and Ephesians in theology. So that's just a little bit of extra knowledge in case you ever hear anybody saying, ooh, anybody saying that. So we've already discussed that it's Paul who wrote it. Sorry if I'm talking really fast. If you need me to slow down, just let me know. If you have questions, just unmute yourself and like ask. Because some of you I can't see. So next, to whom? So we see that also in verse 1, to the saints who are in Ephesus. But if you look at your footnote, which I didn't add footnotes into the print off, but in most texts include a footnote here saying that the ancient texts lack Ephesus here. So it would read, to the saints who are faithful in Christ Jesus. Which is interesting. I didn't know that for a long time, or maybe I didn't read my footnotes. I'm not sure. And then at the end of Ephesians, you can see that there's no, if you remember in Philippians, or remember any other letters you've read from Paul, he usually includes personal greetings to people towards the end of the letter, and he didn't do that in this one, which makes it interesting, like why he wouldn't do that and like specifically greet people or like name drop or whatever. And that is because people think that it was a general letter that was meant to circulate to many of the churches in Asia Minor, which is like modern day Turkey, which is where Ephesus is located. But Ephesus was the largest city in that area. And so that may be why somebody stuck Ephesus in here. I'm not saying somebody, or this one said Ephesus. But it also, when you start reading through Ephesus, and once you understand kind of the Ephesian culture back then, that Ephesus would be the main target for the letter because of Paul's focus on Gentiles, which, as you did your color code, you would see that Paul does mention Gentiles and focuses a lot on Gentile-like behavior. And there would have been a lot of Gentile Christians in this city. They would far outnumbered. I can't see this whole thing because of those. Sorry, just a second. I'm trying to, whoa. I can't see my whole slide. So I'm trying to fix, outnumber the Jewish Christians in the city. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Everybody tracking so far? We're good? Okay. So where was this written from? We can see in 3 verse 1 and 6:20 that Paul is in prison. And then where is he in prison? So when we look at Acts, we can find out when Paul was in prison. Acts is such a great backdrop for all of Paul's epistles, and because it gives such a great detail of his life in the early church, and it helps kind of understand when and where he was, different places, and his connection to the different churches that he wrote to. So we see in Acts 16 he was in Philippi for a day, and then in 23 he was in Jerusalem for 1 day, and then in 24 he was in Caesarea for 2 years, in prison in all these places, and then in Rome for 2 years. So in Philippi for 1 day, he's probably not going to write a letter in 1 day in prison. And in Jerusalem, same thing. Like, he's probably not going to have time for that. In Caesarea, it could be in Caesarea or Rome that he wrote this letter from. So we're going to look into Ephesians to see if it gives us any clues of where he's writing from. So in 6 verses 21 through 22, I'm just going to look at it real fast. I feel like I'm just like speeding through this, and I don't want to be too fast either. Okay. So it says in verse 21, so that you may also know how I am and what I am doing. Tychicus, the beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, will tell you everything. So that shows that Tychicus is with him and that he's sending him to Ephesus or to wherever he's writing this from, or to. And then Tychicus is also mentioned in Colossians 4:7 in the same way. Paul is saying, I'm sending Tychicus to you. Paul is also in prison when writing Colossians. So people hired messengers to hand deliver mail during this time. It wasn't like there was a post office and they just like went and put a stamp on it and all that. But they would send multiple Paul would have likely sent multiple letters with Tychicus to different cities at one time because delivery of mail was costly and time consuming because he would have had to walk or, ride on his donkey or camel or something. But it would have taken a long time for him to get somewhere. And Colossians and Ephesians are pretty close together. So it would have made sense that Paul would have sent Tychicus with at least both of these letters. But also Colossians 4:9 mentions Onesimus is with Tychicus. And that he's sending Onesimus home to Colossians with Tychicus. Now, if you don't know who Onesimus is, let me tell you. Onesimus is the main character of Philemon. So maybe this is really confusing right now. So I'm going to try to make this connection. So Paul is saying in both Colossians and Ephesians, he's saying, I'm sending Tychicus to you. And then he also says, hey, I'm sending Onesimus in Colossians. I'm sending Onesimus back to you. And it's believed that Onesimus was from Colossae, and that's all. He is also the main character of Philemon. So it's most likely that Onesimus and Tychicus are leaving Paul with 3 letters: one to Ephesus, one to Colossae, and one to Philemon, the house of Philemon. Is that making sense? Are we good with that? Okay. I already said that. There we go. Done. Okay. So in Philemon, I know this is a long, kind of process to get to where we're going, but just bear with me. Philemon 22, because it's only one chapter, so the 22nd verse of Philemon, Paul says he hopes to return to them soon. So he hopes to return to his friends soon. So if you read in Acts, when Paul is in prison in Caesarea, he knows he's going to Rome. He appeals to the governor and says, I'm a Roman citizen and I'm appealing to Rome. I want to be on trial in Rome for whatever you're accusing me of. And so he never intends to be released from prison in Caesarea. He knows he's going to Rome and he waits those 2 years until he finally gets to go. So it's most likely that he, and he did hope to be released from prison after his Roman imprisonment. And scholars believe that Paul was first imprisoned in Rome between 60 and 62 AD. So we now have our answer that Paul most likely wrote this letter to Ephesus between 60 and 62 AD from prison in Rome. All right. I feel really weird because everyone is so quiet. So now
No, you're doing great. We can say you're doing great. I have a fun little tidbit just to share.
Okay, do it.
That when I was in Israel, I was in that very place in Caesarea where we actually saw the remains of that place. Like that would have been where he was in prison, where he would have appealed it, and
wow.
that whole area there. They have just the ancient remains there. So that's kind of cool that we saw that. So anywho, yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, that's awesome. Huh. Okay, so is that all making sense that how we got to where we are? Now we know Paul's in Rome writing to Ephesians and during that time while he's in prison. Sorry, I had something in my throat. So now we're going to talk about the Ephesians in the first century. So hundreds of years prior to the Roman Empire, this area was mostly rural. So, I mean, I can understand, I think we all can understand that, living in Iowa, coming from Iowa. But back then, each of in that area before it was like taken over by Rome, it was a Greek city, and so all these little cities would have worshipped their own gods, like ritualistically, in all these little small towns. And travel wasn't really easy or practical back then. But when the Romans took over, they changed all that because they created roads to aid in their ability to control all these little cities that they had conquered. And dang it. Sorry, happened again. My phone's not staying on. Sorry about that. I didn't know that. Okay.
Hey Mel, is it covered up because of the people on the side?
Yeah.
Like the little
Oh,
box
I can
of people?
hide it.
You
Oh,
can
there we
hide it
go.
and move it around. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay. So like you can see, their highways were the largest the world had seen up until that time. The highways helped mobilize the troops and encourage travel between towns and increase trade. And so these highways caused a huge move toward urbanization. So I guess we can, and because of that, Ephesus became one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire. We'll talk about why in a minute. Because Ephesus, here's the road to Ephesus. Nowadays, a lot of it's been destroyed, but that's what's left over. And this is the port city of Ephesus on a major Roman road, and then it had a port. So it was a huge trade city. Once the Romans came in and built all these highways and these roads, it increased the travel, obviously, and the trade. Like the economy boomed in Ephesus, and so many people wanted to move there because it was just really growing and its success and all that. So the people who migrated there, they brought within their own cultures, their gods, their religions, and their rituals. So if you think about it, there's like all these different cities and these different little towns, and they're all coming to Ephesus because of its success and prominence in the empire, and they're bringing all these different little gods, and so now you have this kind of melting pot of the Roman Empire, and it was also known as like a spiritual Disneyland because you have all these different gods you can kind of choose from, all these different like godlike rides you can take. Gods that promise you different things, and people would worship them in different ways. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what that meant more specifically in Ephesus. So with all the culture and religious differences entering the city, what issue might that cause that we can relate to? Anybody? I can't see you.
I would say I think we can relate to just, division based on different things. If so-and-so believes one thing and that doesn't, jive with what I'm believing or whatever, that can cause disagreement or discord, which obviously we can relate to that just because that happens on small scales. In this day and age we live in, it also happens on larger scales, like globally or like, in our country or in our communities and stuff. So
I think it would also mean different religions, different denominations, that type of thing, maybe.
Yeah.
Like a denominational difference today.
Right. Yeah. Good. Anybody else? Okay. How will they all get along when they're bringing all these different, I mean, just like any place that you go and there's a lot of immigration, like you're trying to get along together and notice people's differences and still have some sort of unity and some sort of like common ground, I guess, with people. So that's it. How do we get along? How do we have unity? We're going to talk about just religious background of Ephesus in that time. So we've heard of like, probably heard of like universalism or postmodernism, this movement in our culture today where there's no absolute truth. Truth is relative. Truth can be whatever you want it to be. Like all religions lead to the same place. A lot of people believe that it's whatever you want to believe and it's going to lead you to the same place. It doesn't really matter. Well, the Ephesians believe that anything could be true. So they indulge in worshiping as many gods as they could to be safe or good. And that's kind of what I meant when I said like they were known as like a spiritual Disneyland. Like it's just like it's this ultra consuming or consumption of like religion and rituals and worshiping different gods. Like all the gods, let's take all of them, not just one. We want blessing on financially and fertility blessings and all these different things on our land and all this different stuff. So we're going to worship as many gods as we can so that we're as successful or healthy or whatever as we can be. And this is called syncretism. If worshiping one God was good, worshiping many gods is better. So then the Ephesians would have small statues, like almost like just little ones. I don't know what you can see because I can't see myself. In their homes and businesses, like kind of like souvenir, like mini statues, not only to appease the gods that they worship, but also to please customers and travelers as they came through or they moved into the city. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about specifically within kind of this belief system or religious system of the people in Ephesus is dualism. And that was a major belief system in the ancient world, not just in Ephesus. And if you don't know what dualism is, if you haven't heard of it before, it's the belief that people are made up of the physical, which is pure evil, and the spiritual, which is pure good, and they completely oppose one another. So it's not like where we believe we have a spirit, soul, and a body, and they all kind of work together. It's like they're complete opposites, and your physical can't be good, and your spiritual can't be evil. Like that's what dualism is. And even new Christians that had come out of that kind of dualistic understanding or belief, they had issues with the teaching that Jesus was both God and man. So they believed that the God part of him left when he was crucified, or that he was more like some sort of ghost, like phantom, hovering over people while he was on earth, like, which is weird. Anyway, so that would be one or the other. So, is that making sense? Like if he was anybody, are people understanding what I mean by that? I can't see anybody, so.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is like that because of their belief that was separate, that it was really hard for them to understand or accept the fact that Jesus was both God and man.
Mm-hmm. So that
would have been so
right.
counter what they believed in, that it would have been like really radical. I mean, it is really radical, to be honest.
Right.
I mean,
right. Nobody else has ever been both God and man before.
But this is one of those things though, where it's like we have all of this history of Christianity and of Jesus and of we have these teachings that none of these people have. That's what's so interesting about this is like, yeah, this is a radical thing, but we more easily believe that, we know that he was God and man, but it's like, we're so far removed from it when it actually happened that sometimes it's hard to really like stop and really try to understand their perspective. Like this would have been, they don't have all that like we do. And so it would have been like just really, really mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It's easier for us because we have, like you said, so much history, and it's not this like brand new thing to our culture or society or whatever. Okay, so there are different types of dualism. The first one we're going to talk about is called aestheticism. And this is, if you haven't heard of it before, it is the hope that one could suppress the evil or the physical side to elevate the good spiritual side. So a lot of people, it was like they would kind of try to like beat themselves out of it, beat it out of them, or like they would punish themselves in order to beat, like I said, beat the evil out of their bodies. Men would often castrate themselves. So that's one side of asceticism. And then there's called libertinism, and that's like the opposite. It's a lifestyle or pattern of behavior characterized by self-indulgence and lack of restraint. So that's like, well, my spirit is good and the physical side is bad, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to do whatever I want, because I can't make my spiritual side bad. So it's going to be good because it's always good. So I can do whatever I want and I'll be fine. So like I said, they didn't affect one another, so nothing mattered. Whatever they chose to do, like I said, wouldn't affect either side. The goodness of the spirit, all was permissible, and sin did not exist. So it was a free for all, do whatever you want kind of deal. Okay, that's I think that just from the way that Paul talks in Ephesians, I think that is a lot of what he is addressing in Ephesians, is that kind of behavior, that kind of free for all, do whatever you want, it doesn't matter, anything, you can do anything because your spiritual side is good and your physical side is evil, and they don't have anything to do with each other, and it doesn't matter what you do. Okay, well, okay, so one of the Greek gods that they worshipped was Artemis, and she was a Greek god of fertility. And she had a temple in Ephesians, or in Ephesus, a huge one. And travelers it was one of the first things they would notice as they entered the city. At the time, it was one of the 7 wonders of the world. And it was huge. I have a picture of it. I think it'll come as we move forward through this. And Ephesus, like I said, was the main center of her worship. So people would pilgrimage to worship her, and they would take many idols home as souvenirs. She was a big deal. And there was even a large bank located inside this temple. And it was just, it made a lot of money for a lot of people, not just people in the temple, but people who would make little idols and things like that. They profited a lot off of the worship of Artemis. It was so prevalent in Ephesus, and this is what it looked like. This is not a real picture, obviously, but this is what it would have looked like back then. Huge temple. And that is her. I thought she would be prettier than that, but she's not. So inside the temple of Artemis were hundreds of temple priests. They were eunuchs, virgin girls, prostitutes. That's what made up them. And worshiping Artemis promised fertility, which was low at the time. It was hard for women to get pregnant and stay pregnant. Long life, sexual fulfillment, and gentle death to suffering women. And then a lot of men were mostly interested for the exotic, like sexual acts of worship, because it was like I mentioned before, like this dualistic, this libertinism out of dualism, like anything goes, you can do anything, and then also it's like, okay, so you can do anything, and in order to appease this God, like you're gonna perform these different really inappropriate sexual acts, like to have her bless you. So that's what people did.
Hey, Mel.
Yeah.
I'm totally learning a lot.
Good.
I'm just saying, like, this is crazy. Like, you can't even imagine all that going on. You don't even think about that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very interesting, because if you don't know all this background stuff, it's not going to make sense. But wow, like, yeah, it's very interesting.
I think it will change some of the things that you, as you read through, like knowing that sort of history and that background of how they viewed like themselves, like their spiritual side and physical side, and how they had previously engaged in worshiping gods. Like I think it will help you understand why Paul mentioned specific things throughout Ephesians to them specifically. I think it just brings, for me at least, it brings a better understanding. Like, why does Paul mention this here and not like a lot of other things? Because it seems like these people probably would have been struggling with a lot of things that Paul brings up specifically. So another type of like religion in the Roman Empire at the time was called the imperial cult, and it was emperor worship. So after the death of Julius Caesar, his son Augustus had him named a god so that then he would be known as the son of a god, and this continued as with the following Caesars. One of them demanded he was the god of Jupiter and made a statue idol of himself. Claudius and Nero referred to themselves as Lord, and Augustus had a temple for Julius built in Ephesus. So not only was Artemis a big deal in Ephesus, and there were lots of people there bringing all their religions, there was a temple for Julius Caesar built in the city where people could go and worship him. And emperor worship was so common because it was a way to gain favor from the empire, expressing their allegiance and loyalty to gain something from the Roman Empire in return. So the last thing that we're going to talk about as far as the religious kind of different things that were going on in Ephesus in that time is mystery cults. And you'll see the word mystery, if you didn't notice it already, is repeated many times by Paul in this letter. This idea is that they believe that sin wasn't the main problem of humanity, but ignorance, because the people were unable to understand, like, because with the secret knowledge, I think I missed a word in here, but anyway, that people needed to have secret knowledge to understand this mystery that like made them, that like saved them. It was part of like salvation. So it was given at a price for those deemed worthy to have it. It was closely guarded and gave salvation to its chosen members. It could bring several different things like healing, success, immorality, and they had different initiations for chosen members that joined the mystery cults. They were baptized in the blood of a bull, and I listened to that be explained, and it's really gross. Women would have to breastfeed live animals, and men would castrate themselves and live as transvestites. So this was all just this I would say this made up thing where it's just like, well, we have this secret knowledge. If you want it, we're gonna choose you, and then you have to go through these crazy initiations in order to join our special group of people, and then we'll give you the secret knowledge. So that's just kind of a background of the different things that Paul was kind of walking into when he brought Christianity and the gospel into Ephesus. We see a lot of it in, I was going to show you something first. Maybe it will work.
Can I like say a little comment real quick? Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
I just feel like this is just so like mind blowing to me that it's like we think that he was, I had this like idea that, you know, I feel like I may be alone in this, but it's like, I don't know, like just that Paul was going into some of these places and people were just like ready and waiting, like just for this news,
yeah.
You know, and it's like, these people were not ready and waiting for this news. Like, and not only were they not ready and waiting for this news, this is like, I am like, wow. I mean, for Paul to go into this cultural environment and take this very countercultural news, like, is just like, wow. Like, it's just like almost like this crazy mountain that just seems like, you know, like it would be so overwhelming to go into that culture with this is what they're doing. And it's like, I know I just am speaking for myself that it's just like when I read through this, I forget, first of all, I didn't know any of this. But it's like, we forget that this is not like a bunch of like, you know, like proper people just like in their homes bored, like waiting for somebody to deliver their gospel news. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry if that makes me sound ignorant, but it's like, sometimes I feel like we forget that this was going on. And this is, you know, this is just, wow. I mean, it
And then he
just
has to
really
go and
makes,
he's got to go convince these people that like what they're doing is not right. And they're probably like, wait, what? No, like, what are you talking about? This is great. Everything I'm doing is great. And
Yeah.
it's satisfying to me right now. So why would I
Yeah.
change that?
hmm
Weird.
So if you think about like all the things that they like, how big of a transformation of their life they would have to make, you know, and how like in their mindset even, because they have all these ideas of what it looks like to worship a God, and Jesus is so different from that, and what God asks of us is so different than that, you know.
What it makes me think about is the love that Paul had for his Savior to bring this message to such a screwed up, messed up, turned around society. But he did it because he loved Jesus so much.
Yeah.
And he knew that it would be so good for these people. It's just amazing. It really is. And it makes me feel a little bad that I struggle going to the people I work with and saying, you know, and being able to minister to people when, wow. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my thought.
Yeah. I think that Paul, though, he understood grace. Like, he understood, like, how much he didn't deserve the grace of God. You know what I mean? Because of, you know, how he got saved and what he did prior to that. And I think that wasn't on accident, meaning, like, that God needed somebody like Paul who had this, like, really deep understanding of God's grace. You know what I mean? To be able to go into these places and see these people, these hurting people, and knowing not necessarily just as hurting people, but these like screwed up, messed up people who, which we all are, but like the very backwards way of thinking spiritually, and these just crazy ways they worshiped their gods, and to say, well, God gave me grace and I need to have grace for these people, and his grace is no different for them than it is for me, you know.
well, and I think that's so amazing, Mel, that's just really powerful. Like just that comment about him being understanding. And you know what, even though he wasn't doing those things, and that wasn't his belief system, it's like he was really bound, and he was really you know, backwards before, you know, before his life was transformed. You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's just this reminder that, you know, God uses our stories, like, and uses, you know, those people, as somebody who had some squeaky clean life, who never understood what it was like to be turned, you know what I mean, who didn't understand God's grace in that way, wouldn't have made the same impact for those people.
Right.
It's like he could go to them saying, remember where you were, because I remember where I was, and how God had mercy on me, and the same is for you, this freedom, you know.
Yeah, it's good. Huh. Yeah. Powerful stuff. And we haven't even gotten into like interpreting like that. I just love this. So I just anyway, I hope y'all are on board with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about Paul and Ephesus. I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly, but I do want to get to the end of the slideshow, and I'm almost finished. So if you want to go back and read through some of the parts, like starting in, well, I'm not really sure. I can give you a better, like, so it's starting Acts 8:18, and it should give you some, I think. I don't remember if I wrote everything down. Yep. Acts 18 through 19 will give you some of what Paul experienced while he was in Ephesus, if you want to better understand. But we'll go through some of it here. I just didn't think we'd have time to read through it, and we don't. So Paul made his first trip to Ephesus that we know of, that was recorded in Acts in 52 AD. And he left Aquila and Priscilla, his sort of companions and disciples sort of deal there. And then in Acts 19, on his third missionary journey in 54 AD, he comes back to Ephesus and he preaches in the synagogues. And then that's where the Jews would obviously be. And then he's met with opposition and unbelief by the Jews, which is typical. We see that, when Jesus was here on earth. And then we see that with Paul's ministry several times. I mean, that's mostly who try to kill Paul or the Jews. Then he preaches at the Hall of Tyrannus, which would have been wasn't a synagogue. It would have had Jews or Gentiles. So that was how there were several people that would have come and visited that. And because we were talking about how people would travel to Ephesus to visit Artemis and to visit the I can't think of the word, the temple of Julius Caesar, and then go back to their home. So that's how the gospel would have traveled throughout the province of Asia because of Paul speaking and preaching in the Hall of Tyrannus for 2 years. We see him through this time. We see him healing. We see him casting out demons. That's just, and magicians turning to Christ. These are just things that are happening through Acts 19. And then followers of Artemis turned to Christ, which affected many people's incomes. I mentioned before how people were a lot of people that didn't even work within the temple were profiting off of the worship of Artemis because they would make like her statues, like little mini idols and things like that, souvenirs, I guess, for people. And so when people were turning to Christ and not doing that anymore, they didn't want those things, and so people were getting upset, and they began to riot. So yeah, that just is some of the stuff that happened in Ephesus. And then that's when Paul was imprisoned in Ephesus, and then he was released after that riot. But you can go back to Acts 19 and read about that if you want. So we kind of talked about this a little bit. Kristen mentioned, and then we kind of talked a little bit more about Paul and him going to Ephesus and what that would have been like for him. It was really important and strategic for Paul to go to Ephesus because of the spiritual strongholds and because of how populated it was, and the commerce and travel there, and because he was in the Hall of Tyrannus, like I just mentioned, how quickly the gospel would have spread. It is believed that Paul wrote both of his letters to the Corinthians during his time in Ephesus on his third missionary journey. And then First Timothy tells us that Paul left Timothy to lead the church at Ephesus the last time he traveled through Macedonia, which I don't know when that was. I don't know exactly when that would have been. Then we know through history and people that have written down that the Apostle John made his home in Ephesus after he was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he wrote Revelation. And it is recorded that he would be carried into the church when he could no longer walk, and he would say to the saints, "Little children, love one another." That's all he would say, and then they would carry him back out, and that's where they believed that John died. Sorry, I'm almost done.
That is like John, the disciple of Jesus?
Yeah.
Or, okay. Like the one Jesus loved?
Yeah, the one Jesus loved. Yeah, he wrote that about himself, didn't he? Yep. So historians also record that after John passed, Onesimus, which we mentioned before, who's found mentioned in Colossians and in Philemon, became the head of the church in Ephesus. So this is just kind of some little tidbits about the church in Ephesus. So what Krishna mentioned before, the humble beginnings of Paul's ministry here brought forth a huge increase in Christians in Ephesus. By the second century, the Temple of Artemis became a meeting place for Christians. So this place where this fertility god was worshipped in these nasty orgy ways, just really immoral ways, that it turned into this place where Christians began to meet because it emptied, because people started turning to the gospel and the faith in Christ, all because of Paul's obedience.
That is literally nuts,
isn't it?
I'm just saying that is seriously crazy. Sorry, I know I don't say anything very often, but I'm just like, my mind is blown. Like if I had that emoji where like the brain is popping out, that's me
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so powerful. Like it's just, the gospel is so powerful. And it's just because of this, like one person's obedience. I mean, that's how we have like all that we have in the Bible. And then, you know, how the gospel spread to all of us. It's just nuts. What God can do with one person who's willing. So yeah, any of them, any of those people, Paul, Timothy, those people who were with him, Priscilla and Aquila, like all those people who they could have been intimidated by the immorality in Ephesus and considered it hopeless for transformation, but they didn't. Oh, I still have a few things left. I'm really sorry. I'm almost done.
And I feel like too that like these people you just mentioned, like they could have just said, I got my salvation and like I'm over here, like I'm good. You know what I mean? Like I'm good. Like why do I have to really, you know, why would I go into that? Like, you know, they could have had that sort of mindset. I just feel like Shelby said about that temple becoming eventually this place of like this house of worship for Christian people. Like it just is such a picture of like God's redemption. Like just like, you know what I mean? Like redeeming this culture, you know, and just like bringing freedom and like turning things right side up, you know, for not that there wasn't still suffering and trial and whatever, but wow, like just wow.
Yeah. I'm just looking. Sorry, I want to see how much I have left because I don't. Oh, I have like 3 slides left, so we're good, I think. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the difference between Gentiles and Jews, because as Paul preached in the Hall of Tyrannus, like there it says right there in Acts 19 that there were both Gentiles and Jews. So then the church would have been made up of both of those, which is different than what the Jews had experienced in the past, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So, and based on what we just talked about how they worshiped and how the Gentiles thought about themselves, about spirituality. So they were considered inferior. This is kind of like what the Jews thought of them, and second class to the Jews. To become a full Jew, a Gentile must repent, be baptized, and circumcised. They then adopted a tribe of Israel to belong to. Oops, keep doing that. If not, like if they wouldn't be circumcised, then they could not enter the temple, only the outer gates. That's as far as they could go in it, to the temple. They were.
I'm sorry. I have a sort of an odd question. And how do they know? I'm just saying, were they like, we're gonna check you out now, buddy? Like sorry, but it's just weird.
Maybe, I'm not sure. I wasn't there.
Like, drop your pants before you can go in.
I think it was raise your skirt, not your pants.
Yeah, right, Lisa.
Oh yes, thank you, Lisa. Thank you. We want to get it biblically correct. Raise your skirt.
Moving on. So they were looked on as impure, sinful, and not chosen, because the Jews were the opposite in their own minds. And the Jews thought that the gospel of Jesus, as opposed to Judaism, was just a watered down version of Judaism. It was like, oh well, you're accepted, you don't have to be circumcised, and you can join in, and so we're making it easier for you to kind of become a part of this. And then it went both ways. So not just that the Jews looked poorly and thought these things about the Gentiles, but Gentiles had their own views of the Jews. That rhymed. Jews were exempt from being drafted into the army because of the Sabbath day. They couldn't march on those days, so because it broke the Old Testament law. The Gentiles didn't like that. They were called atheists because they didn't worship God as an idol. How can you worship a God you can't see? Was their thought. And then they were also called elitists because they refused to worship multiple gods. So they thought that they were like, you think you're too good, and And Gentiles envied the Jews because they were known for being monetarily successful, which is probably based on a lot of like the tithing and stuff and the way that God taught them how to use their money from the Old Testament law. And it helped them to be successful because God is, very wise and all of that. So the Gentiles were upset about that, or they were just jealous. They didn't get along, is what it's saying. So there's a huge problem of disunity in Ephesus. There is a large amount of racism and prejudice between these two groups of people that began to permeate through the church. Come on. Oh. The Jewish Christians could seem arrogant in their ethnic right to God. They did not see Christianity as a conversion for them, but only an extension of what they already believed in their Judaism. And so then the Gentiles, on the other hand, were having this huge identity crisis. And this is why. This is some of the things that I think that they would think as we read. And I think that as we read in the first chapter of Ephesians, like we can see Paul addressing some of these things. And maybe you might relate to this, or you might, as we've talked about just what life in Ephesus would have been like how the Gentiles would feel this way. So this is what they're thinking. I mean, this is what they're probably thinking, and it makes sense about what Paul says. All the words that he uses, like we talked about at the beginning, like he uses a lot of words to say maybe the same thing over and over. Well, they need to be reminded. Are they good enough? Are they forgiven fully? Do they belong? And as Paul reminds us, and repeating this like phrase over and over, in Christ, yes, you have all these things. You do belong. You are forgiven. You are enough. Right? So as to this problem of disunity and this identity crisis that Paul writes this letter to a diverse church that needs to be reminded of these things. Who they are, who Jesus is, what grace does for all of us, and how to live in peace with one another. And Paul's strategy for recorrecting their worldview is this. This is what they do with like counterfeit money. That's how they know. Anyway, is that knowing the truth in order to identify the lies. And that's what he gives in Ephesians. You are not this anymore. This is not who you are anymore. You are now this. It's already been done. You do belong. The grace is the same. And then this was what I would say would be the key verse. Verses, I would say, to Ephesians. For grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. That's all I got, friends. This is the end. I don't know what just happened.
Good stuff, Mel. Thank you so much. What a great presentation and everything, and just laid it out. So it made a great connection. Thank you. That was awesome.
Good. It's good to see all your faces again.
In the light of what our world is facing right now and the mess that the world is in and all the turmoil, I'm just moved by this and how much God wants us in unity. It is. I'm really moved by it. I'm just moved by the length that God took Paul through and what he took Paul through to show his love for all humanity. It's just, Anyway, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Getting emotional.
Good. It's powerful stuff. I think it's
It
timely.
is.
It's timely right now. You know,
Yeah. It is very
unintentionally
timely.
so. I mean, on my
Yeah.
end, like we had no idea. You know,
Yeah.
Perspire last week or so.
I'm picking up that what has been brought to my light just by you reading all this stuff is that this is millions, or not millions, sorry, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we're still dealing with the same stinking problem today.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's just like, you don't think so much about, because you think that the issue is right now, it's been going on for the last 100 years or 200 years here in America. And so it's our problem. Well, it's not our problem.
No, it's
It's been
humanity's
going
problem.
on forever,
Yeah.
Mhm.
since the
It's
beginning
called
of time.
Yeah, sin.
Yeah,
Right.
And not walking in love towards your
Right.
neighbor.
right.
And pride. I mean, that's really what it is.
Yeah.
It's pride. It's, I'm better than you. You know, I want to
Mhm.
belong, and if I belong, then you don't. You know what I mean? But I
Yeah.
think we all fall into pride one way or another. You know, it's hard to break those things, but anyway, it's been good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know what's going to happen next week because I'm not sure where I will be. So we'll see. I'll keep you updated. We might have to skip next week. Sorry, I know we skipped last week. Just because I don't know if we'll still be traveling or where I'm going to be on the road. I feel like the road is going to be a hard place for this. But
Yeah, I probably will have to miss if we do have it too, just throwing it out there, just because we'll be coming back next Sunday from Colorado as well. And
oh,
we probably
really?
won't-
I
Yeah,
didn't
And
know
Melinda
that.
hitch a ride with you?
oh, Thursday to Sunday. I don't know,
Okay.
but
All
yeah.
right. Well,
Anyways, well, I was gonna
Maybe
share
we can
something.
move it to another day. Could we do another evening next week, maybe? Like, oh no, we can't, Melinda. I'm sorry. I forgot.
I have to
You're
work.
working. Yeah. You can do it from work. They won't mind.
Okay. Since you do
Be
it.
like, don't interrupt me, guys. Excuse me, I'm in the middle of something.
I'm teaching the Bible right now and you're paying me. So just leave
Yeah.
it right now. Yeah. Anyway, I should go because, people are being quiet in here and I feel bad that I'm 20 minutes over, and so that we can all go to bed and get up and go to Colorado tomorrow.
Well, have fun.
Fine.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
for
Very
showing
good.
up.
What
It's really good.
what can we be doing? Should we just be looking through and just kind of still paying attention to the coloring and stuff?
If you haven't done all your color code, if you want to do some more, that's fine. Be meditating on just some of the stuff that you thought about today, some of the things that people mentioned, and how that's like maybe stirring in your heart, like, and just especially with what our country's going through right now, and maybe what that makes you feel about unity and all those different things.
I think it'd be good just to read through it again after we just learned all that information. Just to read through it again. We'll look through it in different eyes, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a
That'd be
good
good.
idea, really. Maybe next time, like, do a read aloud.
Next time? No, she's saying
No, I
do
mean,
it on
act
your
just on your own.
Oh,
Yeah.
Shelby's like
Next
laughing at me
time
like,
we're
we're not doing that.
next time we're going to jump into interpretation. So I think that'll be hard for me to do on the road. So, and I got a new fancy whiteboard that I want to use at home. All right, guys. Love you all. Nice to meet you, Lisa.
Good
Oh.
night.
Hi,
Ashley!
Hi, Ashley.
I was gonna do a dance performance, but she told me no.
Oh, you should have.
It's the finale. It's the Bible study finale, Dan.
Okay. Well, have a great night. Have a good week. I'll talk to you
Bye.
later. Love you guys.
Love you
Love
guys.
you.
Bye.
Bye, Lisa. Bye,
Bye.
Kristen.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Leo. Bye,
Bye.
Amy.
Bye.
Goodbye,
Okay,
goodbye,
bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye. 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 Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.